Hello students, welcome to today's lesson. Today we are going to see processes of evolution. But before we go directly to today's lesson, let us revise what we have seen in the previous lesson. In the previous lesson, we have seen evidences of evolution. We have seen on paleontology, embryology, and evidences of evolution. Today we are going to see processes of evolution, the process by itself. Now let's define terms that are very useful in our lesson. Natural selection is a theory that explains the origin of species in terms of survival. Those best adapted will survive to a specific environment. So the fittest will survive is one theory. Species are a group of organisms that can reproduce with each other so that they can produce fertile offspring. So these are species. Speciation is the process by which new species evolve. So speciation is process by which new species evolve. Now let's see types of selection. There are three types of selection: directional selection, stabilizing selection, and disruptive selection. And now let's see one by one. What's directional selection? Directional selection is it shows a feature may show a range of values. Individuals at one extreme could have a disadvantage, whereas those to the other extreme have an advantage. One organism have an advantage and the other have disadvantage. For example, thicker fur or longer hair in foxes, which is advantageous in cold weather. But the opposite, thinner fur in foxes is an advantage in hot climate. So these cold and hot are opposite, and thinner and thicker is opposite. So this extreme can have this kind is directional selection. Where do this directional selection come from? It is either by mutation or new combination of alleles new combination of alleles. Stabilizing selection is the second type of selection. It is, from the name itself, a stable environment. Individuals at both ends of the range of values for a future are the least well adapted. Individuals at both ends of the range values for future are the least well adapted. Selection often operates against both extremes to reduce variability in the population and to make population more uniformly adapted. Disruptive selection is the third type of selection, the converse of stabilizing selection. It's converse of stabilizing selection, and in this instance, individuals are at both extremes of range have some advantages over those displaying the mean value. So the organisms that are found on both extremes will have more advantages. The frequency of these individuals range will increase over time, or those on the middle range will decrease. So individuals that are found on the middle will decrease, whereas individuals on the both extremes will increase. How can natural selection lead to formation of new species? There are two main ways: allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. Let's see one by one. What is allopatric speciation? Allopatric speciation is a species become isolated by some physical feature. Example, a river changing course, a mountain range being created, a landmass separating two bodies of water. This is known as allopatric speciation. So this is a speciation that occurred by isolated of some physical features like a river changing a course from where it was going, and mountain range, new mountain range if it is created, and a landmass separating two bodies of water. This is a type of geographical isolation, as we have seen. This that we have taken landmass, mountain, and these all are geographical area, and this is known as geographical isolation. Interbreeding between the population becomes impossible because of this geographical boundary, and new species could result because of this isolation, and this is known as geographical isolation. This allotropic speciation could occur when a population from existing species become geographically isolated, and the isolated population develops into new species. So due to the result of geographical isolation, this allotropic speciation will occur. Symmetric speciation occurs when a population from existing species develop into new species without becoming geographically isolated. So in here, there is no geographical isolation from other members of the original species. In the previous allopatric speciation, we have seen that there is a geographical isolation, and the original species and the new species are geographically isolated. But here, there is no geographical isolated, but still new species have developed. And seasonal isolation, members of two populations reproduce at different time of a year. This is by isolation by season or year. Temporal isolation is the members of two populations reproduce at different times of the day. When the difference is day in terms of day, we call temporal isolation. Behavioral isolation is members of two populations have different courtship patterns. When the courtship pattern is changed, then we call behavioral isolation. So seasonal isolation, temporal isolation, and behavioral isolation. In seasonal isolation, the difference is in terms of year, whereas in temporal isolation, the difference of population reproduce at different times of a day, whereas in behavioral isolation, members of two populations have different courtship pattern. The courtship pattern is different. Now let's see polyploidy and why it's important in plant evolution. Polyploidy occurs when an organism has more than two sets of homologous chromosomes. Poly means many, ploidy means chromosome. When the set of chromosome is more than two sets, then the phenomena is known as polyploidy. Polyploidy is a phenomena that occurs on an organism when there is more than two sets of homologous chromosome. In a normal scenario, there are two sets of homologous chromosome, but here there is a more than two. Tetraploidy, tetra means four. Organism has four sets of homologous chromosome. If the sets of homologous chromosome becomes four, then the name will become tetraploidy. Tetraploid. Tetra means four. Now let's see the difference between divergent evolution and convergent evolution. Now we have seen the speciation, and let's now see the two types of evolution, divergent and convergent evolution. Now let's consider what is divergent evolution. Divergent evolution is another name for process we have already met, adaptive radiation. In divergent evolution, a basic type diverges along different lines because different selection pressures in a different environments. So this is where diverges along different lines because different selection pressures in different environments. Convergent evolution is a process by which unrelated organisms evolve similar structure adaptive for the same function. Convergent evolution is where unrelated organisms which do not relate evolve similar structure adapted for the same function. This is known as convergent evolution. The change is convergent, where there is the base for this evolution are unrelated organisms, and they evolve for similar structure and adapted for the same function. Now, convergent and divergent evolution, if we compare and then take their example, convergent evolution is seen on sharks and dolphins, whereas divergent evolution is seen in the case of Darwin's finches, which they do have divergent evolution. Now let's see example of natural selection. Antibiotic resistant in bacteria is one example of natural selection. Peak size in Galapagos finches are example of natural selection. This will bring us to the end of today's lesson again. Let's meet on the next lesson. Until then, goodbye.